Hello and welcome to this overview of utility rate setting in California. In this presentation, we'll cover how utilities are funded, what is a utility rate study, the California regulatory framework, cost of service analysis, rate design options, and the rate approval process. The utility services we all rely on, such as water, sewer, and trash, are funded in large part by the rates customers pay. Revenues from rates are collected in an enterprise fund for that utility. Enterprise funds are separate from the general fund and can only be used for that utility. For example, monies collected through rates cannot be used for any other purpose, such as to fund libraries, parks, or public safety. Utilities must pay for themselves and meet minimum debt and reserves to maintain a financially healthy utility. They must keep up with rising costs and be able to implement critical capital projects that are mandated or necessary for the health and safety of customers. Enterprises are funded by customer rate revenue as a not-for-profit business. And California law requires that rates must be based on the cost of providing the enterprise's service. The purpose of a rate study is to reconcile the differences in projected expenses and revenues and factor actual expenses and surpluses or deficits into the projected revenue needs. Conducting rate studies on a regular basis are critical to the healthy operation of the utility and to ensure that the utility is setting a course toward meeting future financial obligations. Rate studies are typically performed every 3 to 5 years, ideally by expert financial analysts. Rates and fees must fund operations and capital projects, maintain reserves, and ensure customer rate equity. A thorough analysis resulting in a financial plan, cost of service study, and rate design is a best management practice in how we'll achieve fiscal stewardship of utility operations and ensure delivery of safe, reliable, high-quality services that are essential to our everyday life. The rate study is a financial planning process to set rates that consider the following factors: that rates are fair and equitable, aligned with community values and priorities, that rates are sufficient to ensure the utility's continued financial viability, ensure efficient operations and critical routine maintenance, enable critical infrastructure investment and comply with ever more stringent regulatory requirements, and that rates are in compliance with state law. Performed regularly, utility rate studies provide transparency into what can be expected in the years ahead and ensure the enterprise has the financial resources to meet its budget, manage system capacity for growth, remain compliant with new and existing state and federal regulations, maintain infrastructure, and implement new technologies and a capital improvement program known as the CIP. Over the past 10 years, inflation has risen nearly 30%, impacting the cost to operate and maintain these systems. Similar to higher costs for most consumer goods, utilities are impacted by rising costs for energy, fuel, equipment, parts, and labor. California's legal framework guides how to determine rates and charges for utility services. In 1996, California voters approved the Right to Vote on Taxes Act, also known as Proposition 218, which established new requirements for setting local government fees and charges, including utility rates. Substantive requirements of Proposition 218 include that revenues cannot exceed the funds required to provide the service. Revenues cannot be used for any purpose other than to pay for the service for which it was charged, and the amount of the fee cannot exceed the proportional cost of providing service. The utility is tasked to set rates proportional to the cost of providing the service, reasonably allocate amongst grouped ratepayers based on a cost of service, and use reliable data. Prop 218 outlines the following rate setting process: identify the parcels subject to the charge, calculate the amount of the charge to be imposed, provide written notice to all property owners, and hold a public hearing. The notice includes the proposed rates, the basis upon which the amounts were calculated, the reason for the rates and charges, and the date, time, and location of the public hearing. A public hearing will be held not less than 45 days from mailing the notice. At the hearing, protest to charges will be considered. If a majority of property owners and customers protest the charge, the City Council cannot adopt the proposed changes. Typically, there are 5 steps in a rate study. Step 1 is simply a process by which we get to know what's important to the organization and the community. This can include such things as conservation, affordability, or different rate structures. In Step 2, we conduct what's known as a financial plan to assess how much money the utility needs in any particular year. In Step 3, we conduct a cost of service and rate design, which involves detailed calculations, alternatives, and customer impacts. In Step 4, once a rate proposal is determined, the study is documented in a study report that will serve as part of the city's administrative record. Finally, in Step 5, utility customers are notified of proposed rates 45 days before the public hearing. Prop 218 also prescribes a way for customers to register their opposition to proposed utility rate changes. The financial plan projects revenue and expenses to determine if revenue is sufficient to fund operations. If it is not sufficient, there is a need to increase revenues to fund anticipated costs such as operations and maintenance, capital, and reserves. When the total amount of revenue to be recovered is known, a cost of service study is performed to allocate a utility's overall revenue requirements to the various customer types or classes of service, such as single-family resident, multifamily, commercial, ag, etc., in a manner that reflects the relative costs of providing service to each class. As an example of best practice in industry guidance, when studying water rates, financial analysts from Raftelis follow the American Water Works Association manual called Principles of Water Rates, Fees, and Charges, which is used throughout the United States to set utility water rates. To illustrate, a cost of service takes all costs and puts them in different buckets. In the example shown for a water utility, the buckets include costs to supply water, deliver water, peaking costs, cost to maintain meters, etc. It's important to know that rates are not arbitrarily picked out of thin air, and Prop 218 has to be met. There's a process to calculate and design rates. We know how much each class owes from the cost of service, and when we take the fixed charges and the new rates, we multiply them by all customers and end up with the cost to serve each class. When you multiply by all the customers, we end up with the utility's total revenue requirement. Different types of customers generate different costs because of their use characteristics. Each customer group must pay their fair share and can't be required to pay the costs incurred by another group. For example, residential customers can't be required to pay more, so commercial customers can pay less, or vice versa. Key contributors in this process are number 1, residents like you who are passionate about the rates you pay for essential services. 2, city staff who have access to key data and institutional knowledge to inform the process. 3, your rates consultant whose job it is to review all of the data, crunch the numbers, answer questions, convey the challenges and benefits of alternatives, and make recommendations. And 4, the City Council, charged with making data-driven decisions with the community's best interests in mind. The first 3 share in the important role of providing information, studying the challenges, and advising solutions. Ultimately, a recommendation is presented to the City Council, which will review the financial plan, rate study results, recommendations, public input, and make the final decision. To summarize, cities and utility agencies perform rate studies to ensure rates keep up with the cost to provide the service. Rate studies are conducted to ensure that a utility's financial health is maintained in setting a course toward meeting future financial obligations. In California, rate setting is guided by Proposition 218. And finally, customers and community members are encouraged to provide input and participate in the rate study process through to the public hearing. Thank you for joining us on this quick tour of setting legal utility rates in California.